Good morning. Welcome to Voice of Mongolia podcast. This is the platform where we bring you the unique cultures of Mongolia by bringing you interesting individuals to tell you their story. And today, on our inaugural episode, we have a very special guest, Erin Eidenschink. Okay, hi Erin.
Hi.
So could you please introduce yourself briefly and tell us about what brought you to Mongolia?
Sure. My name is Erin Eidenschink, and I first came to Mongolia in 2009. I had just graduated from university in the States, and I knew that I wanted to live abroad after I graduated. And so I had applied to several different scholarships and programs that would allow me to live and work abroad. And the one that I was chosen for was a 3-year program where you spent 1.5 years overseas working with a nonprofit, and then 1.5 years back in the States working with a nonprofit. And the catch to the program was they chose you, but they didn't tell you where they were sending you until after you were selected. So there were a number of different countries that were possible. And I had studied German in university, so I thought, surely they'll send me to a country that speaks German. And in my head, I was thinking, I just don't want to go somewhere cold. And then after I was selected, a few months later, they sent me an email and said, you're going to Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia.
Wow.
And I honestly had to look it up on a map. I wasn't even totally sure where it was, which is embarrassing now, but at the time was true. And so that's how I ended up here.
That's like, and then I don't think Mongolia is even like shown up on the maps, like Mongolia specifically, right? And wow, that must have been a huge surprise for you.
It was, and I had a lot of learning to do because I really didn't know anything about Mongolia before I came.
I was gonna ask, like, what were your first impressions of coming to Mongolia, and how was the process of adapting to Mongolia like for you?
I think in some ways it was really good that I didn't know anything about Mongolia before I came, because I came with a really open spirit and I just wanted to learn everything that I could. And so that first year that I was here, or really the first 1.5 years, I just was so in love with learning about the culture and the people, and everything felt special and sparkly and magical. And I fell in love with the country so quickly. And then I couldn't imagine not loving it. And so it was really just this special time of like discovering Mongolia for what it was and not any preconceived ideas that I had about it.
Yeah, I guess that's a very good point to go into something without really thinking about it too much, right? Because then there's a possibility of like overthinking things and then being too nervous to go in there, right? I'm wondering, what was it like for you to like socialize when you first came? Were there other international students with you?
Yeah, there was one other young woman who was a part of the same program as me. And so we were roommates, we lived together. And we really got to experience that together. We worked in different locations, we worked at different areas, but we would come home at night and talk about what we were learning, and we would practice our Mongolian together. And we could share what was frustrating us or what we were excited about. And it was really helpful to have someone else. And she's still one of my best friends to this day.
Amazing. Is she also living in Mongolia?
She's not anymore. She did come back and live here for a few more years after our program had ended while I was here. And then she moved back to the States to get her master's degree. And so now she's back in the States.
I see. Wow. That must be a very like memorable experience for you, right?
Yeah, we consider each other family now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So to talk more about your experience living in Mongolia, how would you compare your lifestyle in Mongolia, like also as a student and also as a working adult, to that in the US?
Yeah, it was interesting because when I first came, I had just graduated university, and in university I was super busy all the time. I was involved in all these activities, and I was studying and writing papers and working, and I had every moment of every day like scheduled out on my, I could tell you what I was doing every 15 minutes of the day. And then I moved to Mongolia and I started this job, and suddenly there was all of this time and things were so unplanned. It was like, oh, this is happening now. This is happening in 5 minutes. And part of it was I didn't speak the language yet, so I didn't always know what was happening. But I think Mongolian culture too is just more spontaneous and more open to last minute plans and last minute things happening. And that was a really big adjustment for me at first. And I had to get used to that element of doing things more spur of the moment. And I remember trying to make plans with a friend for like 2 weeks from that point. And I like wrote it down in my calendar. And then the time came and I went where we were supposed to meet and she never showed up. And she was like, oh, I totally forgot that we made that plan. And it wasn't mean-spirited. It was just, she had a different concept of planning something far in advance. And I had to learn that. Just element of it's better to check in and remind people and
that's true.
Know things closer to when they're happening.
I'm learning that too, and that's why I kept messaging like, hey, a friendly reminder, you know.
And I think now I've been here so long that I've gotten used to that, where it's just more common to just wait till closer to, or to remind people, oh, like we said we were doing this, you know. And and I don't mind it anymore, you know, but at first that was a big adjustment for me.
I think it would be a very, and then also the shift in your like routines you would cause, right? I think it's a big like adapting curve, I guess. Another question I had for you was, can you share like a memorable experience from your experience in Mongolia with us?
I was trying to think about which of the many experiences to think of. I think a lot of the travel that I've been able to do while I've lived here has been super memorable. My husband and my daughters and I, we went to the Gobi Desert 2-3 summers ago when the pandemic was still happening. So there were no foreign tourists allowed, and it was just Mongolians traveling. And actually, like, the whole province was closed unless you were tent camping. Like, all the ger camps were closed. And so we were really like the only people in all of these places, or there were very few. And on one of our last straight days, we drove to the Flaming Cliffs. And we were the only people there. Like, we just camped in emptiness. We drove through the cliffs, and there was no one else there. And we stood at the top of them, and it was just one of the most beautiful experiences of my whole life.
It's so, it must be like very, I don't know, humbling in a sense.
It really was.
And to go there, that's a very popular place for like even Mongolians to go there, right? It must be amazing. How long did you guys like stay around there?
Our Gobi trip was not as long as I would have liked it to be. We had some work stuff we had to get back to the city for. But I think we went for about 5 or 6 days through different parts of the Gobi Desert.
Nice. Did you go in the summer?
We did, yeah.
It must have been hot.
It wasn't too bad, honestly.
Oh, really?
It was starting, because it was August, it was starting to get a little bit cooler, especially at night. But during the day, it was quite hot, for sure.
It must be. Wow, that's amazing. I still haven't been to the Flaming Rocks yet.
You need to go.
I really gotta go.
So beautiful.
Yeah, I'm putting that on my schedule right after this.
Before it gets cold.
That's true, It's getting crazy cold. Another one I was wanting to ask you is that what were some like misconceptions, I guess, about Mongolia that you've encountered, like foreigners have about Mongolia?
I think people who have never been here before, who know a little bit about Mongolia, they often think about Mongolia as being underdeveloped or not having a lot of infrastructure, or being really poor, or everything looks like the countryside. And of course, that's not true. And so I always have to explain, like, I live in the capital city. There are over 1 million people. It's very much a city. And I have a friend, she's also not from Mongolia originally, and we always joke that people think we have these adventurous, exotic lives and we're sleeping in gers and riding horses, when in reality we're washing dishes and making dinner just like everyone else, you know? And so I think, of course, there are lots of wonderful, adventurous parts about living in Mongolia that we get to do on occasion, but most of our lives are very similar to people all around the world, and they don't look that different.
Yeah, so true. We're still addicted to our phones, scrolling on Instagram.
And we're still doing the same daily tasks and chores that everyone else is doing. And sure, sometimes it looks a little different, or we might be cooking slightly different food, but in general, it's very similar.
Yeah, I've met a few people that would ask me, when I say I'm from Mongolia, they're like, you must be so good at riding horses. I'm like, I've never been on a horse, thank you. And then otherwise they'd be like, oh, how's it like living in the gare in the winter? I'm like, I don't know, I'm in an apartment, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's like very common, I suppose. Yeah. So since your background is in education, you're a teacher who works with kids. I'm interested in your perspective on the Mongolian education system and yeah, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I've had to learn a lot about it coming. I became a teacher once I moved to Mongolia. I went through a certification process and have taught for 12 years now. And I've been lucky to work at a bilingual school, and so we teach both the Mongolian national curriculum and then an English curriculum. And so I've been able to see kind of how the Mongolian curriculum works as well as our other curriculum. And also just talking to my husband and hearing his stories about going to school and growing up here. And I think one of the biggest differences is that the classes stay together all through school. And they become such close friends and they really know each other so well during that time, which is very different from my experience in the States because every year you change and you get new classmates and classes.
Oh, okay.
So you don't stay together with the same people each year. I mean, if you go to a smaller school, you still kind of all know each other, but it's not that same like, here are the 28 children who are 2A and they're gonna stay together until they're 12A when they graduate. And so I really love that sense of community that is built and the friendships that grow over that time of being in school together.
I see. Yeah, it's a very big deal because like every time they graduate, it's always like tears. I'm gonna miss you so much.
And they still get together with each other and see each other on a regular basis. Like that's very different. I don't really see anyone from high school particularly. So. I mean, I also live across the world, so that's part of it. But, but there is, I think, culturally here, this sense of connection to the people you went to high school with, that you went to primary school with all the way through high school. And that's really cool.
Yeah. So I guess there's no like 10-year anniversary get back together kind of.
There is, but because the classes are so large, right? So then it's not just like 28 kids, it's like all 300 kids who went to school at the same time. So it's not the same sense of connection, really.
So you teach in primary school, right? So what would be the most rewarding aspect of being a primary school teacher?
My absolute favorite part of being a primary school teacher, well, there's several things, but as far as the actual teaching goes, I love teaching kids to read. It's the coolest thing to have a kid walk in and they can't read. And as adults, we forget what that was like to go through the world not being able to read things. And then you have these 6, 7-year-olds who come in and that's the place of life where they are, like they can't read things. And then you spend this time with them over the course of 1st and 2nd grade. And then this whole world is open to them in books. They can read signs, they can understand what's being written, they can start telling their own stories, and it's just the coolest thing.
Wow. Yeah, I actually can remember not being able to read.
Right?
And that sounds kind of insane.
Yeah. But we all went through that period where we had 6, 7 years of our life where we had to rely on other people, adults in our lives, to translate what was going on around us through words. And it's really cool when we get to help kids learn that skill for themselves.
Amazing. Wow. Wow. Yeah. I'm like having a whole bunch of like flashbacks to learning to write and everything. Wow. I remember struggling so hard with learning how to write the letter H. I would like overlap it and then my mom would be mad at me like, why are you doing that?
And that's the thing about school, that's about the thing about learning, like those memories, those challenges that we face, they become a core part of our memory of being children, of learning and how we feel about ourselves. Like if you decide when you're 6 or 7, I'm not good at X, Y, or Z, like that can stay with you for the rest of your life. And it can determine what career you choose. It can determine what you feel good about doing. And I think that's like so huge when you are a teacher to have power over how these kids experience themselves and their sense of learning.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And actually that makes me wanna like ask you what education that's like non-academic that you want to instill in your students?
Yeah, for me, the biggest thing is I want each student to walk into my classroom and to learn that it's okay to make mistakes. Because I think so much of education, so much pressure can be put on writing the letters exactly and not making any mistakes and always telling the right answer and feeling yelled at if they make a mistake. And for me, it's so important that my students always feel comfortable to ask questions and to admit when they've made a mistake. And I always tell them, like, we learn from our mistakes, we learn from what we don't know. And if we can't share what we don't know, then we're never going to get what we need to grow. And so that's really important to me.
Yeah, that is so true. And I think for me, that was an experience that I had to learn as an adult. And I still have to learn sometimes, because I would always go back to not asking for help, because I should be able to do it on my own, right?
We all have to, but I think, and maybe I'm more sensitive to this because I've lived outside of my home country for so long, but when you live outside of your default culture, you have to become comfortable asking for help, and you have to become comfortable saying, I don't know what you're talking about, or I don't know what we're doing right now, or I don't know how to best handle this situation because I'm not understanding the cultural cues, I'm not understanding the words that are being said, I'm not understanding the scenario that's causing this struggle. And so I think if you want to live abroad, if you want to live somewhere else, you have to have that humility of like being willing to mess up and make mistakes. And otherwise, you're just never going to be able to truly understand what's going on around you in a really powerful way.
Wow, that was very profound, actually. And I think that it's very important that people in your role as teachers are making it their point to teach that to their students, right? So that they can grow up and be happier,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, absolutely.
Like circling back to your fond memory of like teaching kids read. I remember you telling me that you're a fan of reading and literature. So what is your perspective on the role of literature in Mongolian education or in the culture in general?
Yeah, I think, stories are so powerful and they're a really important part of Mongolian culture. And I always talk to my students about how stories are not just things written in a book, but they're also the stories that we tell one another, and they're also the stories that we pass down from each other. And I think Mongolian culture has a really beautiful tradition of sharing those stories verbally and telling them. And of course that goes back to being nomads and you can't carry around, like trunks full of books and written materials. And I think now we're kind of seeing, as we have more access to those things, how books can also be a part of that process. And as books become more available for children and for adults to read, that it's becoming more common for people to read books, which I think is really awesome. I've always loved to read. And so when I first came and it wasn't quite as common for people to have books or to read books, that was sort of a shock for me because I'm used to like huge, beautiful public libraries and tons of books available. And I remember when we were first here, we went to like the big national library by Sukbatar Square, and we walked in and there was like not that many books, and like it was a very strange, like you couldn't really check them out, like you could only look at them there. And it was interesting for me to see how different that was from what I was used to in the States. And part of that is just, Mongolian is a less known language, so there aren't as many books printed in Mongolian. But I think, thankfully, there's been a lot of progress in that recently, in that there are much more printed books available, and there's more efforts to have children reading at an earlier age and have access to books.
Yeah, I think reading's become like almost a pop trend these days, right? And I think thanks to the book talk, like a big part. And it's been great to see like younger kids reading and telling each other about their books they've read.
Yeah.
All right. So we're nearing the end of our episode today. It was so lovely talking to you. To wrap it up, is there anything you would like to tell our listeners, now viewers, who are interested in coming to visit Mongolia or staying here for a long time?
Yeah, I think anyone who wants to come to Mongolia, sort of what I was saying before, is they have to come with an open mind and they have to be willing to learn. I think that sense of humility is really important when you come to a place that is not your own. And be willing to be uncomfortable and to do things that might feel challenging or outside of your comfort zone, because you'll find a lot of really amazing things outside of there.
All right, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for being here with me. All right, listeners, that wraps up our today's episode of Voice of Mongolia podcast. We will be back with you with our fresh episode next week. Until then, bye-bye.